Today, we're going to get into the hidden side of ADHD. This is a story that goes so much deeper than just focus issues or hyperactivity. We're talking about emotion, self-worth, and what happens when you finally understand what's really going on. So let's just start with this one big question. What if all those things you've been told your whole life are your biggest flaws? Being too sensitive or lazy or impulsive. What if they weren't actually your fault at all? Because, you see, for so many people, especially folks who get diagnosed later in life, the real battle with ADHD isn't just about trying to focus. It's about living in a constant, overwhelming, and totally misunderstood world of their own emotions. Okay, so let's dive right into that emotional core. We're going to start with something that researchers are now realizing is absolutely fundamental to ADHD, even though it's been pretty much overlooked for years. The key idea here is something called emotional dysregulation. And no, this is not just about being moody. This is a real clinical struggle to manage how intense your emotions get and how long they stick around. A good way to think about it is like having an emotional volume dial that's just stuck on blast. The feelings come on fast, they hit incredibly hard, and then they take forever to cool down. And this is not some rare fringe symptom. It is incredibly common. Seriously, look at these numbers. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 30 and 70% of adults with ADHD deal with this. So even at the lowest estimate, we are talking about a huge portion of people. This is a core feature, not a minor one. So what does this actually look like in real life? Well, it might be having a really low tolerance for frustration, where a tiny little hurdle feels like a giant, impossible wall. Or maybe it's sudden, powerful waves of anger or sadness that just seem to come out of absolutely nowhere. And it's definitely those outsized reactions to small things, where spilling your coffee can genuinely feel like it's ruined your entire day. And this brings us to a really crucial point. When these big emotional reactions are constantly misunderstood by everyone around you, they don't just go away. They actually start to create these deep, lasting wounds on the inside. It happens through this really devastating cycle. So it starts with an ADHD symptom, right? Like interrupting somebody or forgetting something important. But the outside world doesn't see a symptom. They see a character flaw. They see you as rude or lazy. And that leads to this constant drip, drip, drip of negative feedback. After years of this, you start to internalize it, and it becomes a core belief. There is something fundamentally wrong with me. I mean, just listen to this quote from one woman talking about her life before she got her diagnosis. Imagine really, truly believing, down to your bones, that you are just not an adequate human being, all because your brain is wired differently. That's the kind of weight so many people are carrying around. So, let's be really clear here. This isn't just about getting your feelings hurt once in a while. This constant diet of criticism systematically destroys a person's self-esteem. It creates this chronic feeling of being a failure, of never living up to your potential. And that can follow you your entire life, no matter how smart or talented you actually are. And this intense internal world, it doesn't just stay internal. Oh no. It has massive real-world consequences, and it ends up shaping huge, life-altering choices. When your emotions are that powerful, they can start to drive the bus. You see it in things like impulsive spending, just to get that quick hit of feeling good, or suddenly quitting a job after one really bad day because the frustration just feels completely unbearable. It can mess with relationships, or on the flip side, it can lead to just avoiding important stuff because the fear and overwhelm are totally paralyzing. And there's actually a neurological reason for this. When a really strong emotion like fear or anger floods your system, it can basically hijack the rational part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. The part that's supposed to think about consequences? Yeah, that just goes offline for a bit. And what you're left with is a decision driven purely by feeling, which can lead to either a really impulsive action or, just as often, a total shutdown. But then, what happens when, after decades of living like this, someone finally gets an answer? This is the turning point. This is that huge light bulb moment that comes with a diagnosis later in life. This quote just nails the before picture for so many people. A whole life spent feeling like you're just different. And when you don't have any other explanation, where does all the blame go? It goes inward. The only conclusion you can come to is, I must just be stupid, or I guess I'm just lazy. And this is where the power of having a new framework just changes everything. Before the diagnosis, the labels you give yourself are things like lazy, broken, a failure. It all feels like it's your fault. But after, the whole language changes.
Lazy becomes neurodivergent. Broken becomes I have a condition. And my fault becomes it's understood. It's this incredible shift from seeing it as a moral failing to seeing it as a medical explanation. And that shift, it brings this incredible emotional release. The number one feeling people report after getting a late diagnosis isn't sadness or anger. It's just this huge sense of relief. For the very first time, it feels like, oh, this isn't all my fault. There was a reason for all of this. A whole lifetime of self-blame can finally start to lift.
So what happens next? Well, this new understanding becomes the foundation for rebuilding your life. You're not starting from scratch, but you finally have the right instruction manual.
And the path forward has some pretty clear steps. It starts with reframing your past, looking back at all those old struggles and what you thought were failures and seeing them through this new lens of ADHD. That then opens the door for self-compassion, for finally replacing that harsh inner critic with a bit of forgiveness. From there, it's all about building new strategies that actually work for your brain and, finally, taking back control of your future. So really, the whole point is this. Your entire life story shifts. It's no longer a story about you being a flawed person. It becomes a story about a person who has a manageable, understandable neurological condition. And that changes absolutely everything.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to take away. Whether we're talking about ADHD or something else entirely, just think about it. What part of your own story or the story of someone you care about could be completely transformed with just a little bit more understanding?